Mr. Chair, we are officially live.
Good morning. Let me see who we have here. I have some initials that are showing up on the screen, and so that we can get an identification of who is present. I have an SK, a KS, a JF, a TH, and a CW. No idea who all that is. So anybody who's appearing with your camera and your audio muted, before we begin, let's get everybody to identify themselves so that we've got an idea of who's present. Let's start with SK.
Good morning, Mr. Carey. I'm Stephanie King. I'm with the Ad District. I'm just assisting Kristen today.
Thank you, Stephanie. And where else did we go? I know Kristen was on there. JF.
Mr. Carey, that's me, Jessica Fetty, Mayor of the City of Erlanger. I'm trying to put on my video and it's saying permission is not granted.
Video is not required, but thank you very much, Ms. Mayor. And I see CW now. And who else do we have? We have, I recognize Ms. Jasper. Who else do we have in there?
Megan Sanfus. I don't have my camera on, but that's my picture with the Area Development District.
Good enough. And somebody next to JF is who? Between JF and Ms. Jasper.
That is City Administrator Matt Kramer.
Okay, all right. I don't have my screen maximized, I'm sorry. And Councilman Hermes, I see you there as well. All right. All right, thanks. All right, so as far as the committee is concerned, let's do a roll call to establish who we have present. I'm Mark Carey, currently chair the Northern Kentucky Regional Ethics Enforcement Committee. I see Judge Robert Green is present, and everybody else just identify. Judge is our vice chair. Anybody else wants to identify themselves, please do, committee members.
My name is Robert Sanders, or Bob Sanders, is a committee member.
Bryce Rhodes, committee member.
Carol Cummins, committee member.
Thomas Quirk, committee member.
All right, thank you. All right, we have a hearing today on a complaint brought by Ms. Jasper with regard to conduct that she alleges that council member and, oh, wait a minute, I'm getting some sort of a notice. Are you guys getting feedback or something? I got a pop-up that said my audio was not. Okay, all right. If not, we'll go ahead. Ms. Jasper's complaint alleges that council member Hermes violated the Erlanger ethics code and cites specifically to conduct on his part, which she says was in violation. That conduct was identified in her complaint. Councilman Hermes has responded in writing. He's represented today by attorney Chris Wiest, and the complaint suggests that Councilman Hermes violated the code of ethics by using council or city property for personal use. And the specifics of that are that he participated in a candidate forum that was being recorded and broadcast while he was present in the city council chambers, and that behind him he was displaying, I guess, campaign literature, campaign signs, something identifying him and advocating for his candidacy as a member of council. We spoke briefly before you guys got with us, and we thought that for the sake of everybody's time and economy, maybe we could reach some stipulations in advance so that we don't belabor the hearing with a lot of testimony about things people already agree to. I'll address this question first to you, Mr. Wiest. The complaint alleges that Councilman Hermes was a city council member. He was also a candidate for council. He was present during a candidate forum. His presence was was broadcast from or filmed while he was inside of the city council chambers, and that while he was in city council chambers on the candidate forum, he had displayed behind him or around him campaign signs, other pieces of advertising material to identify himself as a candidate for city council. Is there any dispute about any of that we need to hear testimony about, or is that all agreed?
I think, Mr. Chair, we agree to everything except for perhaps and I guess I think he did have a sign behind him that displayed, his name on it. I don't know on that last point. Other than that, we may need to flesh out just a little bit, but I don't think we have disputes about the remaining allegations in terms of the facts.
It says in the complaint that his campaign signs were sitting behind him. Is it that would be the allegation? Is there any dispute that he had campaign signs sitting behind him while he was sitting in council chambers at the Erlanger City Council building during the forum hosted by River City News?
Yeah, I think he did have at least one sign behind him.
Okay. All right. So whether it's singular or plural may be the only dispute. I don't know that that's, if you believe that's crucial to the issues,
I don't think that any of these are material facts.
Okay.
You're going to see. So.
All right. Thank you. And then Councilman Herman.
I'd like to add one point to that. They were my campaign signs behind me, but I will clearly point out that the campaign sign did not say elect or re-elect Tyson Hermes. The signs only say Tyson Hermes, Erlanger Council.
Okay. All right. So you contest that they were campaign signs? Chris, is that, I understand
right. I mean, whether they were identification purposes, I mean, they did not have express advocacy of elect or re-elect on them, but they certainly identified him in the office.
Okay. So you contest that they were campaign signs. The allegation is they're campaign signs. I just want to know if that's a contested issue.
I think they were used in connection with the campaign, but in terms of the actual text on the signs, they said Tyson Hermes Erlanger Council on them.
Okay. All right. So we may need testimony under oath from the council member and candidate at the time whether or not these were signs used in his campaign. We can have that testimony, or if we can't stipulate that they were signs that he used in his campaign, then we'll hear testimony on that. I'm just trying to narrow the issues.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I think we would stipulate that they were used also in connection with the campaigns, but the text of the signs themselves said Tyson Hermes Erlanger Council.
All right. Ms. Jasper, do you have any reason to dispute what I would consider to be an offer of stipulation by Mr. Hermes and his council that these were signs that did not specifically advocate for his election? They just had his name, but they were used in connection with his campaign.
It's my understanding those are the only signs that were used in his campaign. My signs don't say elect or vote either.
Okay, I understand. The question would be whether or not the signs themselves advocated for his election, or they just had his name, and they've stipulated they were used in his campaign. Is there any reason to offer any other testimony about the signs?
No, they were campaign signs.
Okay, so we'll leave the issue of what they were up for dispute, but there's no factual testimony with regard to whether the sign said something other than Tyson Hermes Erlanger City Council.
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, I think that puts us in a position where the allegations of the complaint, with the exception of the characterization of the signs, which would be a finding we'd have to make from whatever evidence we've heard, then the next issue I see that we could potentially resolve is that, Mr. Wiest, it seems that Councilman Hermes, in his letter of October 22nd, makes two arguments. One, that he is a public agency, and therefore he did not, on the date in question, appear in a personal capacity, but he appeared as a public agency. And secondly, that there's some reference in here to the final comment that Erlanger City Council members have access to council chambers, the lobby, at conference rooms, restrooms at all times. And so as it relates to those two defenses, is there something specific you want to have testimony about regarding whether or not Councilman Hermes was a public agency?
Mr. Chair, I think we're going to present testimony from the mayor and others about the private use issue, as well as the 4313B exception within the earlier code of ethics, that this particular room was available to the general public, and the use of the room in question was on only to the extent and upon the terms it was available to the public. I'm going to be offering testimony on both of those points today. I don't know that we can reach stipulations. I'm guessing we're going to have a fight about that, and so I think we may just want to proceed to testimony.
Okay, so tell me what the testimony you're going to offer in defense of what we've already, I think, established is stipulated that he did appear on council property with a sign behind him. Whether it was a campaign sign or not is something we'll conclude after our hearing, and that this was a public candidate forum that he participated in. In defense to that, you're citing 4313, and I guess you're talking about the use.
No, I'm talking about the B exception, and I'm also disputing whether or not his appearance here was a private use.
Okay. All right. Are there facts that you intend to offer with regard to whether it was a private use?
There are, Mr. Chair, and some of those facts include the fact that this particular council room has been used by council members and the public generally for community functions, including previously candidate forums in which all council members appeared. That the city building itself is routinely used by community and other groups. That the Wi-Fi password, that there is not a Wi-Fi password that is available for public use. That I think we'll be offering some testimony today that that both the mayor and the city administrator, that this room would have been available for any council member to appear at a candidate forum, and that furthers a public purpose of informing that we're dealing with free speech issues here. I think we'll have some testimony that other council members have used city resources to fix their internet, that they have conducted tours of the building with community groups, and that all of that serves a public purpose in the same way that Mr. Hermes' appearance at this candidate forum did. We will be offering testimony today. Mr. Hermes does not serve for pay or profit, if you will, that it ends up being a net loss to him to serve, and that this candidate forum was primarily to inform the voters of who they're voting for. And in fact, I think we'll have some testimony today that if what this is somehow determined to be a private use, that every single city council member, including Miss Jasper, who took a picture of herself in front of the city building, has used city property for candidate related functions. That those would be violations as well. And so, that this broad reading of private use, is highly troublesome if her complaint would be sustained. So that's the testimony that we intend to present today.
Could I ask you to summarize one? There are 2 points. One was raised, it seems, by Councilman Hermes in his letter, which I addressed, and then the other that you've raised today. Is there going to be testimony that there is a specifically authorized stated city policy that allows this use?
No, Mr. Chair, I do not intend to offer a 4313A defense. The defense that we're going to be offering is 4313B, which doesn't deal with any specific policy, but instead says the use is available to the general public, and then only to the extent and upon the terms that such use is available to the general public. There's nothing about a specific policy that's required for that. And so, that's we'll be offering that exception, the B exception.
Okay. I just want to make sure we could focus our attention. And is there, and we've, I think in preliminary hearing, and again this morning, we've wrestled with the issue of definitions in the code. The code does address the issue of private use. Can you or perhaps I'm trying to think, or Ms. Jasper, I guess. Can you point me to any definition in the code for what private use means? Is there a definition section that we couldn't find one?
Mr. Chair, I looked at the ordinance. There is no definition of it. And so, we are dealing with an arguably ambiguous term. I would argue that under both the rule of lenity as well as, the rule of adopting a constitutional interpretation to that term, that it needs to be narrowly construed. And so that, it cannot offer any public benefit. The use cannot be any public benefit. And so, that this board needs to adopt a very narrow construction of private use.
I don't mean to be smug, but I haven't heard anybody use the rule of lenity as a defense since I can't remember when. Basically, it's kindness and calmness, and would have fallen into the category of mercy, Mr. Weiss.
Mr. Chair, these ethics provisions include criminal penalties, and as the board may be aware, if there is an ambiguous statute that involves a criminal penalty, it has to be construed in favor of the accused, and that is the rule of lenity.
All right. All right, Ms. Jasper, as it relates to the contested issues, it looks as though on the end of the complaint side of this hearing, you would go first as the person who brought the complaint. And the issue that seems to remain for dispute or discussion, at least, is whether or not these were campaign signs. They've also defended that the property is available for use under 4313B to the general public, and that Mr. Hermes' use did not exceed the extent and terms that such use is available to the general public. Since those seem to be the contested issues, I'll let you go first and offer whatever evidence by way of testimony yourself or witnesses that you intend to call in support of those complaints.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Are you going to testify?
Yes.
Okay. Raise your right hand. You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Go ahead.
My complaint is very simple. Mr. Hermes used council chambers for private use on October 7th, 2020 by participating in an online candidate forum for his reelection campaign while sitting in council chambers with his campaign signs behind him. That is a violation of the city's ethics ordinance. First, before we move forward, I want to clear something up. After reading Mr. Hermes' response to the complaint, there seems to be an assumption that I'm filing this complaint as a fellow city council candidate. That has nothing to do with my complaint. I'm a resident and taxpayer of Erlanger, and that's why I'm filing the complaint. Taxpayer money shouldn't fund the private reelection campaign activities of a current council member. As I stated before, Mr. Hermes violated the city's ethics ordinance by using the council chamber for private use. It's my understanding that the committee has already watched the video of the online candidate forum, so I don't need to review that. I know that current council members have 24/7 access to council chambers, and I understand why that access exists. However, there's a difference in current council members using council chambers for council-related business and using council chambers for your private reelection campaign activities. I also want to address Mr. Hermes' statement via his attorney that he does not make money as a council member. He is paid a stipend. Whether that's at a loss or not is not really in question. He is paid as a council member. I would submit that Mr. Hermes' participation in the forum was as a candidate for his own personal reelection, not as a current council member, and therefore should be considered private use. While he obviously is a current council member, a line has to be drawn between council member activities and campaign activities, especially when it comes to using city property. Campaign activities are private. They have nothing to do with his current council member status. If you apply his logic from his complaint response, he could theoretically have a campaign meeting or fundraiser in council chambers, complete with his signs and banners, and not pay for it. Now, he couldn't hold a political rally because that's already prohibited in the city's meeting room rules, rental rules, and agreement policy. Should he be allowed to use council chambers for his private campaign meeting or fundraiser solely because he's currently on council and has 24/7 access to the room? That's really the question here. Is our campaign activities private or not? And as far as and maybe Mr. Weiss is going to ask me about this, or maybe someone else is going to ask me about this, my photo in front of the city building was outside, not inside, and I'm a taxpayer of Erlanger who was outside the city building and did take a picture. So did other candidates.
Thank you. Anything else that you wish to offer by way of evidence or testimony?
No, I think the evidence is pretty simple.
Do you intend to call any other witnesses? I'm going to let Mr. Wiest ask you questions in a minute. I just want to get.
No, I don't intend to call any witnesses. I may have questions for the other witnesses that are present, though.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Wiest.
Ms. Jasper, let me ask, you did take a photo you were standing on city property and you took a photo of yourself for campaign purposes of the city building, right?
Correct.
Okay. This candidate forum, it was available for each and every voter of the city of Erlanger to be able to assess the candidates running for city council, correct?
Yes.
And every candidate that was running for office was invited to participate, correct?
I didn't do the invitation, so I can just comment on my own invitation.
As far as you're aware, you have no reason to believe that every candidate was not invited.
No, I don't have any reason to believe that.
Okay. How many candidates participated in this forum?
I don't remember exactly.
Okay. Questions were asked of candidates regarding a number of issues and stances that they believed in terms of their candidacy at this forum, correct?
Yes.
And I suppose you would agree with me that the primary purpose of the forum and its organizer was to inform the voters of Erlanger what they might be getting as they voted for each candidate, was it not?
It was, in my opinion, to vet candidates and to know where candidates stand on a variety of issues.
And the reason that we would want to know that is so that the voters could know in casting their votes about where candidates stood on a number of issues, right?
Do you have questions for me or just statements that you want me to agree with?
Ma'am, those are questions. This is cross-examination. I know you might not have been through this before, but I'm allowed to ask questions and you're supposed to answer them. The primary purpose of the candidate forum was for the moderator, in this case Michael Monks, to ask candidates questions to inform the voters of what they might be getting for each candidate, right?
Yes.
You would agree with me that Mr. Hermes himself is a taxpayer and a resident of the city of Erlanger, is he not?
He is. I mean, I assume he is. He wouldn't be able to run for council if he wasn't.
Right. All right. All right. I do not have any further questions, Mr. Chair, for the complainant.
Thank you, Mr. Wiest. Is there anyone else on the committee that would have a question for Ms. Jasper? I see a lot of stares and no voices. So,
Ms. Jasper, do you
Yes.
do you regard the election for Erlanger City Council, the conduct of the election, to be city-related business?
The election specifically?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, an election itself is obviously city business, but the campaigning of candidates is still private.
Okay, and what makes it private versus part of the city-related business of conducting the election?
Well, I myself chose privately to run for council. So that's a decision for me personally.
I understand. But once you've made that decision and you're running and you become a candidate for the city council, are your views and your communications with the Erlanger voters, do you regard those as city related or private conversations?
Until I'm a council member, no.
Okay. And do you have some legal authority or anything in the Erlanger Code of Ethics that would provide authority for that, for your point of view?
I wouldn't be subject to the ordinance until I'm actually on council.
No, I'm asking if there is anything in the code of ethics of the city of Erlanger that you're aware of that would support your interpretation of whether running for council is city-related business or a private.
Right. I understand your question. I think it's been established that private use is not defined, and that's why we're here.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Any other committee member have any questions of Ms. Jasper? I have one. Ms. Jasper, Mr. Wiest has identified at the outset that he's not defending under 4313A that Mr. Hermes made use of public property as authorized by a stated city policy, but rather that the use that he put to the use to which he put the city council chambers was a use which was available to the general public, and he only used it to the extent and upon the terms that such use is available to the general public. Do you have any evidence that you wish to offer that would address those points made by Mr. Wiest?
It is my understanding that if the general public wants to use council chambers for something, they have to pay for it.
Okay.
And my question would be, in cross-examination of the witnesses, was it paid for?
Okay. So Mr. Wiest indicated that the use is available to the general public. Do I understand that you would agree that using council chambers is a use that is available to the general public as far as you understand it?
Me?
Yes.
Are you asking me? I'm sorry. Yes, I understand that it's available to the general public.
Okay. So I'm trying to narrow things down. Lawyers do that. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It strikes ordinary people as unnecessarily complicated. But if we narrow it down, then the question becomes, based on what you've just told me, that he used the property in a manner that exceeded the terms that was the use that was available to the general public. In other words, to the best of your knowledge, he did not pay for it, and the extent and upon the terms that that use was available to the general public would require that they pay a rent.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that he made use of the public property without paying rent, and that in your view is a violation of 4313B. Although the general public could use council chambers, the conditions upon which they use it is to rent it. He made use of it without paying rent. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, and you don't tend to call any additional witnesses?
No.
All right, Mr. Wiest, I'll allow you another question.
I believe Judge Green had a question.
I'm sorry, who did?
Judge Green.
Judge, I'm sorry, I didn't. You were muted. I didn't know that. I apologize.
Well, this fancy meeting environment allows me to raise my hand, and that's what I did. You pretty well covered in the last few words with this witness what I was going to ask, and that is that as I read the policies, private use would be associated with the payment of a fee. Is that correct?
Are you asking me? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
All right. And then I just
I do understand that fee can be waived in certain circumstances.
All right, but that requires some administrative act by someone in authority to.
Correct.
All right. The other part of my question is really geography. Some of this policy seems to be associated with meeting rooms that are separate and apart from the council chamber. And I don't know for sure whether this forum was being conducted from the councilman's seat in the council chamber, or whether it was in one of the other rooms in the building. Can you set me straight on that?
As far as I could tell, it was in council chambers. The view was too narrow to know exactly where the person was sitting in the room. I believe it was in council chambers from what I could see.
All right, thank you.
And most other candidates, well, as far all that I'm aware of, participated from somewhere else. This was intended to be a call just like this, where everyone was participating from separate locations due to the health pandemic.
Yes, I noted that when I watched it last night. Thank you. That's the only question I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Anybody else on the committee have a question? All right. I'm sorry I didn't see you raise your hand. I thought you were waving to one of your many fans, Judge. I apologize. Mr. Wiest, I'll let you ask.
I don't have anything further for this witness.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Jasper, that's all that you have to offer? All right. Thank you. All right. Mr. Wiest, do you intend to call witnesses, have someone testify? What are you making motions strictly based on the law? What's your pleasure?
I'm going to be, well, I suppose I would be remiss if I did not ask to direct a verdict in favor of Mr. Hermes at this point in time. I do not believe, given the candidates or given the complainant's admission and the lack of a definition about what's private and what's public, that everyone was invited, that the voters were informed that this was anything, that this was in fact a private use. And so I would move for a directed verdict. If not, I will present testimony of witnesses.
You know, even though we are to follow the rules of civil procedure in a context such as this, I think it's probably beneficial that we reserve on that motion unless I hear an objection from council members and allow you to proceed. I don't know that there's any harm done at this point. Council member or committee members, anybody wish to entertain the motion and go into executive session to deliberate it, or should we proceed?
I think we should proceed.
Agreed.
All right.
I think we should proceed.
All right.
I agree with that.
All right, Mr. Wiest.
I'd like to call Mayor Fett as our first witness.
I'm here.
Can you state your name for the record?
Jessica Fetty.
And I apologize for mispronouncing your last name. And you are the mayor of the city of Erlanger?
Yes, sir.
Some of the things that you do are promulgate policies for the city, right?
Yes.
And you interpret and enforce policies for the city, right?
Correct.
I want to talk about the use of the council room. Can you inform the body, is it used for community and city related functions?
Yes, it is.
Are outside, right, and are outside groups allowed to make use of the room?
Yes, sir.
Do you charge them for that if it has some sort of public use?
I understand that it has that in the documentation, but I don't, to my knowledge, know that we've ever charged a single organization or individual.
Okay. And can you give the board an example of some groups and others that have come in and used this room historically?
Sure. I mean, there's a number of groups. EC3 is an organization within the Erlanger Ellesmere School District. They use it on a regular basis for their meetings. Has no connection with our city government whatsoever. The Chamber of Commerce has met at the city building, the actual council chambers. A BNI group has met there. Erlanger Business Council has met there. Triad has met there. Even Erlanger Historical Society uses our facilities for their organization. These are public places and they're allowed to use them accordingly.
And do you charge them for that? Has the city charged them for that?
No, sir.
Okay. Let me ask, I'm going to go to this council room. Let me back up a little bit. There is free public Wi-Fi that is used or is available within the city building for the use of any resident. Is that true?
Correct. There is a guest Wi-Fi with no password on it.
Okay, and that's for anyone that's attending any of these meetings or anything else to be able to use the internet.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If any council member or candidate had approached you and said, "Hey, I'd like access to the council room to attend this forum," would you have allowed them to do that?
Sure.
Would you have charged them for it?
No.
And so the room was available on the same terms as it was to Mr. Hermes for any other candidate for office?
Sure.
Okay.
That's what they asked to do. Just like we would any other organization that requests the use of a public room.
Okay. In your view, is there a public benefit to candidates participating in these candidate forums?
Definitely.
Has the room before been used for candidate forum purposes in connection with city council elections?
Yes, sir.
When?
In 2016, when I was running for city council, I believe it was the Rotary Club that held a candidate forum within council chambers. And, I believe 8 to 10 prospective council members and current council members utilized the facility to set up tables, bring in campaign signs, and talk to anybody. It was kind of like run like an open house. And then also in that same year, there was a professional firefighters candidate forum also held within the firehouse, within their training facility, where many council members and candidates participated in that forum as well.
Let me ask, has the city ever had any council members give community tours within the city building itself for community groups?
Sure, that's
And
probably more of a regular thing.
Yeah, what council members have done that, and who have they given tours to?
Well, we've given tours to Boy Scout groups and Girl Scout groups. We've had the Erlanger Youth Leadership Academy has done tours. Councilmember Kathy Cahill and Renee Skidmore give a tour for government, like a kind of like a government day at Tishner Middle School. They do a tour around the entire city building, go into the firehouse and the police department. It's pretty typical.
Is there an ancillary benefit to those council members, perhaps, in their re-election campaigns by giving those kinds of tours?
I mean, I guess any kind of benefit that you get from participating in any city event or city function, or, I mean, it's always a photo op opportunity, or, it's kind of just participating in any kind of city function.
You believe what Councilmember Hermes did as the chief executive officer of the city violated the ethics ordinance?
No.
And to be clear, that same opportunity would have been available to any candidate in Erlanger wanting to use the building to run for office in terms of participating in this candidate forum?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I believe that concludes my questions for this witness.
Thank you. Ms. Jasper, do you have questions of Mayor Fettig?
I do. Was the candidate forum shared on the city's Facebook page?
For the River City News?
Yes. Was
No.
this candidate forum that we're discussing? Why? Why not?
Mr. Kramer will be able to answer that in more detail. However, we have chosen for our social media platforms to not engage in any kind of political.
So actually what I recall is the city attorney advised against that because it was campaign activities. Is that accurate?
Objection. This could get into attorney-client privilege. I'm not sure that this witness may want to waive that.
The attorney said it during a public city council meeting.
Okay.
I don't recall.
Okay, maybe Mr. Kramer will. I have a couple other questions. Was Mr. Hermes giving a tour of the city building during the candidate forum?
No.
Okay. Would you have allowed more than one candidate to use the city council chambers, given the current pandemic and limitation of use, or of more than one person or multiple people in that room?
If that was necessary and they needed to social distance properly, we have plenty of other spaces that could have been utilized. We have the council chambers, which is where Mr. Hermes was, and then we also have the small council chambers, which could have been utilized for another participant. Then we also have the conference room. I would have offered my office. There's plenty of space that's available. If that is something that's necessary, it's a public building, I will, I'll let people that are Erlanger residents use it as they see fit.
I understand that what you're talking about going forward, but I'm talking about this instance.
No, I'm talking about this instance as well. If anybody wanted access, they could have had it.
Okay. Are you the one that makes the decisions about who is allowed to use council chambers? So are those solely your decisions?
No, ma'am. There is a procedure that dictates exactly who is allowed to use our building and when.
Okay, I understand that. I just wanted to clarify because it kind of made it, your prior testimony made it sound like maybe you were the one that made those decisions. So I just wanted to clarify that, and that you decided if they were charged or not.
I think it is based on administratively, we can waive the fees. I don't, and Mr. Kramer will be able to attest to this better than I am, but I don't recall a single time we've ever charged to use our facilities for anybody.
That's all I have for Ms. Fetty.
Any other committee members have a question for the mayor?
Mayor, this is Bryce Rhodes. I just had a couple questions. You mentioned that other groups have used the council chambers in other rooms, like the Chamber of Commerce or BNI group. What's the process they go through to book that room?
They just reach out to us and call the city building or call myself or Matt Kramer and reserve it. If it's available, if you look in the procedures, and I don't know if you guys had, I have a copy of these, but it's procedure number 8.2. It kind of shows exactly who has access and when. And then there's also reservation procedures. And that if you go to, let's see, meeting room rental rules and agreement policy, all city business takes precedence. So if there is an outside group that wants to use the room, as long as it's not being used for city business, it's open. Okay.
Who does those reservations? Is there like just a book someone at the city fills out, or?
Yeah, it's really just a Google Calendar. And if it's available, we can assign, just like a Google invite, we add the space, they add the conference room to the invite.
Okay. Do you know if Mr. Hermes followed that procedure?
We don't require it for people that have 24/7 access. The only time that we would have put that on the calendar is if it's like an outside organization or something that you really want to reserve that room. If there was a city function and Mr. Hermes was in there, he would have gotten booted and he would have to go find somewhere else. The city functions take precedence. If there would have been a council meeting, that's always going to take precedence. But other than that, it's open.
What if like a BNI group had already reserved it? How would you have handled that, if you know?
If the BNI group would have reserved it, would we have trumped this? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
No. I mean, I guess technically, if you go by our procedures, our city employees and city officials do take precedence, and BNI group would take the back seat.
Okay. All right. I think that's all I have.
I have one other question related to that. I know I'm sort of out of order, but I do have another question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. If you don't mind, let me just get the other committee members. Anybody else who might have a question first, and then we'll get back to you. Okay. Any other committee members like to ask a question, have something to say at this point?
I would like to ask a question.
Go right ahead, Judge.
All right. Was the city a sponsor of this forum that Councilman Hermes participated in?
No, sir.
So the forum was basically a video program?
Yes, sir.
And Councilman Hermes, then, is it your opinion that he used his 24/7 access to use the building as an environment for him to participate in this video forum? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And he required no permission from you or any other person in the city government?
No, sir. The procedure is very clear. Council members will have 24/7 access to the building.
Do you have a policy in the city that would limit, for example, the placement of campaign signs on city grounds?
We remove them from, we don't have campaign sign rules because it's content neutral sign regulations. So if we're referring to putting signs in right of ways, it's any signs, not necessarily just campaign signs.
Well, if a council member wanted to put a campaign sign on the lawn of the city building in plain view of the public, would that be permitted?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if there is anything that specifically says that.
All right, that takes care of my question.
Any other committee member? All right, Mayor, I have a couple of questions. You indicated that the use that councilman and I think it's safe to say, and then at the time candidate Hermes made of the council chambers was pursuant to his authorization to have 24/7 access. Is that right?
Correct.
And that there was no effort on his part to call in advance and schedule the time because that was not necessary because he has 24/7 access.
Correct.
All right. Is that a use that's available to the general public to have 24/7 access without obtaining prior permission?
No, because you'd have to get a key card to let you in.
Okay. And then you indicated that you don't believe that he paid any rent for the use of the council chambers. Do you know whether he did or he didn't? Or...
I don't believe he did.
Okay. Do you know if there were any exemptions granted to him, any waivers of the rent that was granted to him in advance of his use?
No.
Okay. Would other members of the public have access to the council chambers without getting advance permission for them to use it without a waiver of paying rent or paying rent? I mean, could a member of the public come in and give a public speech, engage in some other activity in the council chambers, use it as a backdrop for something that they wanted to do without prior permission, without paying rent, or without obtaining an advance waiver of the payment of rent?
They would probably have to see if there's any kind of city functions in there first, because according to our procedures, it states that city functions and council meetings, they all take precedence over any type of other events or activities that might be happening in that meeting room. But if it's available, they would have access to it. And it is from my knowledge, we don't charge rent. We don't charge it to the chamber. We've never charged it to EC3. The Rotary Club, when they had the candidate forum, there was no rent charged.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean groups that were there for some, but I'm talking about a private individual.
I don't believe any private or group has ever been charged, but
Okay.
Matt Kramer will be able to attest to that
Okay.
further.
If they haven't been charged, were they required to request an exemption in advance of the use? I mean, could someone just show up at the city building, see that there's nothing going on in the council chambers, walk in, make use of the facility without requesting permission, paying rent or obtaining an exemption in advance for paying rent, and then use the council chambers? I'm just trying to determine what extent the public was allowed to use council chambers. What rules were in play for the general public?
During the day, when we have somebody that's sitting at the front desk, I mean, right now it's a little different because our lobby is closed at the moment. However, on a normal day, if you come in and see that there's nothing going on, there's nothing on the calendar that's going to restrict your use, all you have to do is have somebody let you in, because it does require a badge to let you have access into that council chambers, basically, which Mr. Hermes has 24/7 access, not requiring any kind of communication or permission.
So it's your testimony that if a member of the general public wanted to make use of council chambers and there was nothing going on that preempted that use, some activity of the city, council meeting, something of that sort, other than gaining access through the badge system or asking someone at the front desk whether they could use it, could a private citizen use council chambers to film a commercial, participate in a Zoom call with free Wi-Fi? Is that without paying rent or without asking in advance whether or not rent would be waived? I mean, the general public used council chambers in that manner without paying rent, without getting an exemption from rent in advance. They had access to the chambers and nothing else preempted their use. Would any member of the general public have the right to do that?
Sure.
And is that availability to the general public and the use made by the general public a matter of a stated specific policy of the city, or is that just us?
I mean, there's the policy for meeting room rental rules and agreement policy that show that it can be.
Okay.
I mean, it goes over the rules and regulations, prioritization, use, and scheduling. It specifically says Erlanger City Council and city-related business comes first. Staff meetings and trainings comes second. Affiliated government-related organizations, nonprofit organizations, other community organizations. I mean, it specifically states that it's for public use. There's just a prioritization of the use.
All right, I follow that. I'm just trying to make sure that we're on the same page. If a member of the general public wanted to go into council chambers at a time when the council chambers was not being used and gained access through a key card or badge or whatever was required, without paying rent and without obtaining any advanced exemption from paying rent, is it a policy or just a custom of the city that any member of the general public could go into council chambers and use it at any time, even if it wasn't for public use. When I say public use, I'm talking about, a Chamber of Commerce meeting, some informative forum, a tour of the city to a group, something like that. If they wanted to go in and record a video, a commercial, or anything, you're saying that that's permissible to any member of the general public at any time that the council chambers are not in use, and that the member of the general public would not have to obtain any exemption from rent or pay rent in order to get that use.
I mean, it's listed in the policy. Technically, the policy says there should be an exemption given. However, it's my understanding that we've never had a situation where we've formally given an exemption of the cost.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I had a couple follow-ups. If now's not the time, I didn't know if committee members still had questions, but I had just about.
I'm sorry. I threw it back to you.
Okay. Mayor Fetty, has any of these other groups, has the city ever put out on their Facebook that the chamber's having a meeting, or the BNI is having a meeting at the city building?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
If it's a particular, I mean, it's up to that particular group that's utilizing our facility to advertise their function.
Was the city a sponsor of the Rotary Club Forum in 2016?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And just to be clear, in terms of campaign signs, at that 2016 forum, everybody got to bring their campaign signs in and put it behind them in the city building at that forum, right?
Yes.
Okay. And any other candidate that wanted to use the city building to participate in the forum this year could have done that, and there was no problem with putting the campaign signs behind them, right?
I don't see a problem.
Okay. Do you believe participation in this forum was a public use or a private use?
Public use.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Jasper, anything else? You might be muted, Ms. Jasper.
Sorry, no, I don't have any other questions. It was answered.
Any other committee members?
Oh, I do. I'm sorry. I do have one thing. I'm sorry. I would dispute what the mayor said about the city sharing prior uses of the city building.
You get to ask questions. You get to ask questions of the mayor because she's currently still on the stand.
I would. Okay, never mind.
That's okay. And by the way, I apologize, but I did not swear you in, Mayor. So I will ask you.
I will rephrase what I was going to say as a question to her, but go ahead.
Mayor, the testimony you've given today has all been the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir. Thank
you. All right. Now, Mr. Bedford, did you say you do have a question?
Was the Erlanger Business Council use of council chambers several years ago shared by the city on their Facebook page?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Because you had stated before that it wasn't shared, that use of the council chambers wasn't shared on the Facebook page, but that was.
I said not all functions that participate, that utilize that facility are shared on the city page. So if you think about the EC3, we do not share their meeting on the city social media. The Chamber of Commerce had the Leadership Northern Kentucky class. They had one of the training sessions in there. That was not shared on the city page. It's still open and available for public use.
I was just asking about Erlanger Business Council, but thank you.
All right, Mr. Weiss, any other witnesses? Any other evidence?
I do have another witness, Mark Kramer, city administrator.
Mr. Kramer, if you would raise your right hand, testimony you're about to give to be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
All right, go right here, Mr. Weiss.
Mr. Kramer, to your knowledge, has the city ever charged for the use of any of its meeting rooms, including the council room?
Since I've been here for the last 3 years, to my knowledge, we have not charged anybody.
And there are, I think you heard the mayor's testimony. Would you agree that those rooms have been used on occasion by all kinds of different groups?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Kramer, if you were contacted by any candidate running for office that wanted to participate in this particular forum by the River City News, would you have given them access to the council chambers to be able to participate?
Anytime we get requests that might be controversial, I generally run that through the city attorney and the mayor just to get their opinions on it. Initially, just looking at what I know right now, I wouldn't think there would be an issue with it.
Okay. All right, and I think that concludes the testimony that I wanted Mr. Kramer to testify to, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Jasper?
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Do you have any knowledge about the candidate forum being shared on the city's Facebook page, and was that advised or not advised?
We were asked about that during a council meeting, and our city attorney advised not to share that on our Facebook page. Yes.
Why was that?
I think it's just because we try not to have anything political on the web page.
Okay.
But that would be a better question for Jack. I apologize.
No, that's okay. I mean, you saw the same thing. You heard the same thing I did during that meeting. I just wanted to clarify that we heard the same thing. So you're saying that the city attorney advised against political activities on the city's Facebook page?
I don't object. It's been asked and answered.
I'm just asking him to clarify.
I think she can add. Go ahead.
I'm just asking him to clarify that that is what his understanding of the city attorney's opinion was.
I'm going to object. It's hearsay.
Go ahead.
From my recollection, that is correct. But again, I wasn't the one that spoke then.
That's fine. We've heard a couple of references to the 2016 candidate forum. When were the procedures that we're currently looking at for room usage written?
I wrote those in 2019.
So the usage that we've referred to a couple of times about a candidate forum in 2016 predated these usage rules?
Correct, and it predated me.
Okay.
I write a lot of procedure, and most of them come up from a situation that arises that we kind of need some clarification in case certain groups want to use it just to give some guidelines. There was a procedure prior to me. I think we formalized it more and probably added to it in 2019, which is why that date's there.
And the current procedures actually prohibit a political rally, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And kind of the question that we've all been asking is, did Mr. Hermes pay for usage of the city council chambers?
He did not.
Okay. That's all I have at this point.
Committee members?
I have a quick question. Daryl Cummins, committee member. Did Councilman Hermes get permission or just speak with anybody to confirm it was open to be used?
He did not communicate with me about that, no.
Thank you.
This is Bob Sanders. I have a curious question first. Who is the Erlanger City Attorney?
Jack Gatlin is.
And do you know whether the city attorney was consulted in any way about Mr. Hermes' use of the council chambers in advance of the event happening?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Anybody else on the committee? Judge, do I see you getting ready to speak?
Yes. I hope I'm unmuted at this point.
From my end, you are.
All right. Did the River City News make any kind of formal application for this particular candidate forum to the city?
Not to my knowledge.
Were you even aware that it was taking place?
I was aware that the forum was going to be taking place from Facebook, yes.
Were
but not officially through the city.
Were you aware that the council chamber was going to be used as a backdrop for one of the candidates?
No.
Did I hear you say no?
No, I was not aware of that.
All right. And these current procedures for the use of the city building, you have fees in there for private use in the policy, is that correct?
Correct.
But you've never used them?
No, we have not. Not since I've been here, since 2017.
You think you ought to take them out?
We're reviewing it now, just like most procedures are reviewed when they're utilized. So I don't think it's appropriate to speak to what we're looking to change at this point, but we are reviewing them now, yes.
That's all I had.
Any other committee members have a question? Mr. Kramer, if I could, I'd like to ask you a couple follow-up questions to your testimony. I'm not certain that I heard specifically, but did you outline a procedure that is typically followed if someone wants to use council chambers for a purpose such as that council member Hermes put it to? Did I hear you say that normally you check with someone about that?
Yeah, we get requests often. If it's obviously an okay, like if the Boy Scouts want it, we know that that's, just off the top of my head, I know that that's a good use. If it is anything that's political based or maybe religious based that might draw some controversy, I'll generally discuss it with the staff and the attorney just to make sure that legally we're okay and that I don't get myself or the city in any kind of liability.
Or have to show up at an ethics committee meeting or something like that?
Correct.
All right. So I guess what I'm getting at is that I heard you testify that in this particular instance, you were not made aware of Mr. Hermes' intended use of the council chambers in advance. And because of that, I presume that the process you described, that is to check with someone else about whether or not it's permissible, legal, appropriate, doesn't fall into the automatic category of like the Boy Scouts. That would be something that would typically require that you do some checking before permission was granted. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
And what kind of checking was required? I know you mentioned the city attorney. Who else would you check with?
I generally check with our city clerk because the clerk's office is the one that maintains rentals. So I like to reference with them just to see what we've done in the past historically, because I try to be consistent, which is why I wanted to create most of the policies just to try to keep consistent. I'll reference ethics ordinances if it's somebody that falls in under that. We'll do a little bit of background on the actual organization I've done in the past just to make sure what they're telling me and what's reality. I don't get myself into trouble that way. And then, I'll generally, if that's not enough, I will ask the attorney and the mayor just to make sure that I'm following the guidelines and what the city really wants to do moving forward.
Are those the terms on which use of the chambers would be submitted as a result of a request by somebody who's a member of the general public? In other words, if any member of the general public brought to your attention they wanted to use council chambers for some purpose, the terms that would generally result in either granting or denying that permission would include checking with city attorney, checking with others within the city, maybe checking with the mayor, making sure that you don't do something inappropriate. Is that a fair statement?
Not everyone I go through all those steps, but yes, anyone that does request it, I'll do some sort of background or research to make sure it's an appropriate use.
Okay. And you said anyone who requests it. Is it standard set of terms for the city that anybody who wants to use council chambers for any purpose has to make some request?
Yes, it's not a written request. It's generally, most things are verbal. I'll get some email requests. So, we don't have a formalized approval, disapproval situation, but, verbal is generally what we use.
The reason I ask is I heard a moment ago somebody mentioned that the process is you just go to the city clerk and get a badge for access to the council chambers. Is that the process, or somebody has to send a request through your office?
No, most of them probably do come through the clerk's office front desk. I generally will only get involved if it's something, large scale or maybe controversial or after hours.
Okay. And I heard you mention something about political. Is it your estimation that the use of council chambers is or is not permitted for individuals that are engaged in some political activity?
I mean, our procedure says no political rallies, so that's what I would say would be prohibited on its face.
Okay. All right. Those are all the questions I have. Anybody else? Let's see, whose turn is it? Ms. Jasper, perhaps?
I just have one question. If Mr. Hermes would have asked if he could use the city council chambers and put his campaign signs in there, would you have allowed him to?
I would have done the research and talked to the city attorney before making that decision on my own, just because it is a little more complicated than most of the requests that we get.
Thank you.
Mr. Kramer, one last question from me. Would that have been the same treatment that you would have given to members of the general public?
I would say I would treat them.
That's a bad question. If a member of the general public requested the opportunity to use council chambers and display a sign with their name on it that said, John Doe, Erlanger City Council, for the purpose of engaging in a forum specifically identified as a candidate forum, would you have gone through that same process before granting or denying permission?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss?
I have just one quick follow-up. Mr. Kramer, recently there was a photo op that was taken with Representative Koenig and Councilwoman Reckers and Councilwoman Pitts. Did they ask permission to use the council chambers to take that photo with Representative Koenig?
KLC reached out and requested the council chambers to have the award ceremony.
Okay, but did those council members request the permission to do that for the photo op?
No.
Did you say no? I'm sorry.
No, they didn't specifically request. It was just a KLC event.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Any other questions from council members or committee members?
I have a quick question to Mr. Kramer. I know that you stated that political rallies would be considered objectionable. Is that correct?
Yes, that's part of our procedure.
Okay. What other types of organizations or individuals that would come to you requesting access would you find, or would the city find objectionable?
Our procedure says any dances, parties, weddings, political rallies, and religious services. Obviously, with different groups coming in, there's gray area, which is why we do vet them to make sure it's not going to turn into a political rally or a religious service specifically.
Okay. And being that this was a candidate forum, would you consider this a political rally?
I would not personally, but again, it's why we have a staff like we do.
Okay.
Challenging questions we don't answer just by one person. We do it as a team.
Okay. And have you denied access to city property in the past? And what would be an example of that if you have?
I don't think we have. I know in this, I can't remember the group that requested it when this 2019 update was made. But I know we had concerns with one that was coming in to request it, but I don't know specifically know.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Weiss.
Nothing further. I think.
Are you attending? Are you talking about with regard to Mr. Kramer as a witness?
I am.
All right. Do you have any other witnesses you wish to call?
I don't think so, Mr. Chair.
All right. Is there any other evidence that you want to introduce?
I don't believe so.
All right. All right. If we are, Ms. Jasper, is there anything else in the way of testimony or witnesses or evidence that you would like to offer?
I have no other witnesses or testimony. I do have a little bit of a closing statement I'd like to make, but
Yeah,
I can wait on that.
May I pose,
your way.
I'm sorry. May I pose a
I'm
question?
sorry, I didn't.
Oh, absolutely.
The stipulations about the facts of the case, does that include the documents and video that we've been given access to? Are those things stipulated so that we can take them into account in our deliberations?
Good point, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Weiss, Ms. Jasper?
I don't have.
I believe everything's in the packet.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the video of the forum.
Okay. That's
We
a yes.
also have the complaint. We have the response that Mr. Hermes sent to us in October. We have a packet of information that was put together by staff that includes committee, well, not those are our committee regulations, but the city's excerpts from the Erlanger Ethics Code, beginning at 4301 through 4313. And the testimony of the witnesses. I don't think there have been any other documents other than the stipulated video and the documents I just mentioned that are in the packet given to staff. Anything else in the way of evidence that we need to receive?
Does this include the 13 pages? I believe you referred to it as the hearing packet that,
Yeah.
That includes, those are all stipulated. Great.
Okay. All right. Well, then, Mr. Weiss, you get to go first with regard to argument.
Mr. Chair, I want to start where I always do, where we've got a heightened burden of proof. And we do have a heightened burden of proof here. And the heightened burden of proof is clear and convincing evidence. And we know that that's not just, a little bit more than or more likely than not, we know that that is a very, very heightened burden of proof. Ms. Jasper has come in to this board alleging Mr. Hermes committed an ethics violation. And what was that ethics violation? Well, she says that he, used private property, that he used city property for private use. And I would submit that we need to look at what he was doing. He was participating in a candidate forum. That candidate forum was available and open to every single council member to participate. And, if you've ever served in local government, it is a thankless job on the best of days. People don't serve local government for their, I'm not going to say never, but generally they don't serve it for their own ends. They serve it for the benefit of the community. And in this case, the participation on that candidate forum was primarily for the benefit of the voters of Erlanger to go and decide who they wanted to vote for. When people run for public office, they appropriately become public figures. We know that in defamation law. Lawyers know that, that is a fundamental aspect of running for office, is you open yourself up, to be scrutinized by the voters, primarily by the voters. And I submit that if this is a private use, then so are Boy Scout tours. So is every single time a council member at a council meeting goes off and pontificates about something, that's a private use because it has some political advantage to them in doing so, perhaps. But the problem with it, and the problem with this ethics complaint, is it's not, if you adopt the construction that Ms. Jasper wants you to adopt, which is that this is a private use, you are fundamentally getting into core free speech. Did it cost the city anything extra to go and permit Mr. Hermes, or for that matter, any member of the public, to use the open Wi-Fi internet, the guest internet? Well, the answer is no, of course not. The building's got to be heated. The internet is what it is. We know that there's a flat fee involved in that. We know that it's available to the public. We know other groups have come in here. Really, this is about, something that in my view and in the mayor's view is not a private use. It's a public use. And it is connected with a public election, and it is connected with a forum of public figures, battling it out over free speech, over who the voters of Erlanger are going to elect. And I would submit that that forum was as much for the benefit of the voters of Erlanger as it was for the candidates seeking their votes. If we're going to constitute, or we're going to construe this ordinance, broadly, we're going to run afoul and create an unconstitutional construction that's frankly going to open the city to liability in a federal forum to have their ethics ordinance struck down. And that is the natural proximate effect of finding a violation here. You have to adopt a constitutional construction of this ordinance, and that involves fundamentally a private use being somebody doing something solely for their own benefit. If there is a city benefit that is construed or that is part of it, and I would submit that there is here, then there's no violation. And what could be more of a city benefit than informing the voters about what you stand for and what you're going to deliver to them if you're elected, which is the entire purpose of this forum. At bottom, I mean, we're not, we are dealing with, to find a violation, you have to adopt an unconstitutional construction of private use. Then you have to go and jump and say, well, not only that, but, because he achieved some political benefit from it, that is a private use. And you're going to end up, nailing council members for giving public tours. You're going to nail council members for meeting with residents, possibly at the city building. If a council member is at a council meeting and they pull up their phone and they answer a work-related email, I suppose, one would go and say that that's a violation. And what you're going to end up with are 12 council members, all of whom are going to be found guilty under this ordinance because we've given an absurd construction to it. I don't think the proof has been met. I think that this, at bottom, is an absolutely ridiculous complaint, and I would ask that you dismiss it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Ms. Jasper?
Thank you. I know Mr. Weiss made this a lot more complicated than it needs to be. It's not a First Amendment issue. It's not a constitutional issue. It's an ethics issue. And the decision's very simple. Mr. Hermes used council chambers for his own political benefit and his own political activities, and that's all it was. It wasn't a council meeting. It had nothing to do with city business. Yes, it was for the benefit of the voters, but he personally benefited from using the council chambers. And I would also argue that there is additional cost to him using it. If no one else was using it, the city wasn't paying to heat or cool the building that night. They weren't paying to have the lights on. So I would argue that there was an additional expense. It may be minor, it is an expense. I believe that Mr. Hermes has violated the city ordinance. And I think that the question here is, are political activities considered private use or not? That's obviously not very clear in the ethics ordinance. And so that's what this committee has to decide. I appreciate your time on this matter. I trust that the committee will apply fair and impartial judgment. I realize this may seem like a trivial matter, but all ethics violations and complaints have to be taken seriously. And the ethics ordinance exists for a reason. It says that you can't use it for private use. And that's clearly what Mr. Hermes did. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jasper. Mr. Weiss, I have a question I'd like to ask you so I'm clear on what your argument is. Are you contending that the city does not have any authority to restrict the use of public property to anyone who would claim that the right to use that property violates their First Amendment rights to free speech? Are you saying they don't have the authority to make any limitations on the use of the council chambers in the city of Erlanger?
I am not suggesting that. Obviously, when we're dealing with what is probably a limited purpose public forum, we get into an analysis there. But fundamentally, I am suggesting that when it comes to council members and candidates for office using city buildings, such as taking photos in front of them, such as sitting in a council room, participating in a public forum with voters, that cannot be a private use because there is a public purpose associated with it. And to adopt a construction that is somehow a private use raises serious constitutional issues.
All right, I think you've answered my question. You believe that the city would not be able to write an ordinance that would specifically prohibit the actual conduct engaged in by Councilman Hermes. You're saying that if the ordinance itself provided that candidates for public office, whether it's city council, state representative, whatever it might be, do not have the right to use council chambers for the purpose of advancing any interests they may have as a candidate. You're saying that they don't have the right to limit the access to public property for that purpose.
If you did that and you wrote that way, Mr. Chair, what you would do potentially is prohibit council members from discussing any public issue on that city property with voters, with constituents, at possibly council meetings. And that's the problem with this. That's the problem with, these sorts of free speech issues. You have to operate with a scalpel and not with a sledgehammer. And unfortunately, I think the ordinance example you just gave raises those very issues. So yes, there are First Amendment issues that are raised here, unfortunately, if you're going to do anything other than strictly construe this ordinance and what private use is.
Okay. Any other questions by committee members of any of the parties? That would be Mr. Hermes through council, Ms. Jasper, anyone else? All right, well, I'll conclude the hearing. Thank you all very much. And I think the process now, if I'm not mistaken, is that we would retire to executive session. That's done by motion and second. We would then exclude the public and the participants and the witnesses so that we as a committee can discuss what's transpired and come to some decision if possible. I think that's the process we are to follow at this point. Kristen, am I correct about that?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I so move.
Thank you, Mr. Seconded by Judge Green. Thank you very much. Well, we will now go into executive session. Thank you all for being here, participating, and hopefully we'll have some sort of a decision for you here shortly.
Thank you.
Kristen, I guess if we are broadcasting, do we need to reconvene, call back in, and you do it a different way?